The Alaskan winter is ruthless. The cold doesn't just freeze the skin, it steals the breath from your lungs, buries the weak, and leaves only silence in its wake. For one man living deep in the wilderness, solitude was his way of life. His cabin, miles from the nearest town, was built for survival. Thick walls, a roaring fireplace, and just enough supplies to last the winter. But one night, everything changed. A massive grizzly bear, starving, desperate, fighting against the brutal storm, appeared at his doorstep. She wasn't alone. Her two tiny cubs, barely strong enough to walk, clung to her sides, their fur soaked with ice, their tiny bodies shivering violently. She had no fight left in her. She wasn't there to attack. She was there to beg. What happened next? No one could have predicted. Stay with us because this is one of the most shocking survival stories you'll ever hear. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. Your support helps us bring more incredible true stories from the wild straight to you. The wind howled against the cabin walls, rattling the wooden beams like a beast trying to claw its way inside. Ethan Parker, a man who had long since traded the chaos of the modern world for the solitude of the wild, sat near his fireplace, staring into the flame. The snowstorm had been raging for hours, swallowing everything outside in a merciless white void. Temperatures had plummeted well below freezing. Even the wolves had gone silent. And then it happened. A sound, not the wind, not the cracking of frozen branches, a thud, then another. Ethan's body tensed. His hand instinctively reached for the rifle leaning against the wall. Out here, in the middle of nowhere, nothing knocked on your door. Slowly, he rose to his feet, boots heavy against the wooden floor. The fire cast long shadows as he approached the entrance. His fingers tightened around the handle of the door. Another thud, louder this time. His breath caught in his throat. Then a sound that made his heart stop. A low, guttural whimper. Ethan hesitated. He knew that sound. It wasn't human. Carefully, he unlatched the door and pulled it open just enough to see through the blinding storm. And that's when he saw her. A massive grizzly bear. Her once powerful, body now frail. Her fur thick with ice. Her breath coming in slow, painful bursts. Ethan's grip tightened on the rifle, his survival instincts screaming at him to shut the door. But then he saw them. Two tiny cubs, barely able to stand, huddled at her side. Their fur was soaked, their little faces sunken with exhaustion. They weren't just cold, they were dying. Ethan had seen plenty of things in the wild, but never this. This wasn't a hunt. This wasn't a threat. This was a mother begging for help. For a moment, he hesitated. Every survival instinct told him this was a mistake. A full-grown grizzly inside his cabin. It was suicide. But then he looked at the cubs again, and he made his decision. Slowly, he stepped back. The mother bear did not hesitate. With one final staggering breath, she pushed forward, crossing the threshold into the warmth of the cabin. The cubs followed, and Ethan, he had just led a wild grizzly and her cubs into his home. What happened next would change his life forever. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears as the massive grizzly took another slow step forward. The warmth from the fireplace must have hit her instantly, melting the ice that clung to her thick fur. The cabin, usually a place of safety, now felt impossibly small. He could feel the weight of her presence. The sheer power coiled beneath her weary body. The two cubs hesitated at the doorway, their tiny frames trembling violently. One of them let out a small, pitiful whimper before stumbling forward, collapsing onto the wooden floor. The other followed, its legs barely able to hold its weight. Ethan had spent years in the wild. He had seen bears before from a distance through the scope of a rifle or the lens of a camera, but never like this, never this close, never inside his home. His breath came in slow, controlled exhales as he kept his movement steady, his eyes locked on the mother bear. She was massive. Even in her weakened state, if she turned violent, if she felt threatened, she could tear him apart before he even reached his rifle. But she didn't. She didn't snarl. She didn't charge. She simply stood there, her deep brown eyes locked onto his. Not aggressive, not desperate, just pleading. For a moment, neither of them moved. The fire crackled between them, its glow flickering against the bear's damp fur. Water dripped from the ice melting off her body, forming dark pools on the wooden floor. Ethan slowly exhaled. If she had wanted to attack, she would have already done it. He took a careful step backward, moving toward the pile of blankets stacked on the couch. He grabbed one, hesitated for only a second, then tossed it onto the floor near the cub. The mother bear didn't react. The cubs, however, did. The smaller of the two, still shivering violently, sniffed at the fabric. It was instinctive, the need for warmth, for comfort. A moment later, the tiny creature buried itself inside the blanket, curling up into a tight ball. The other cub was slower, hesitant, but eventually followed. Ethan swallowed hard. The mother bear let out a deep, rumbling exhale. It wasn't a growl, it wasn't a warning, it was relief. She took a slow step forward, and to Ethan's disbelief collapsed onto the floor. Her massive body stretched across the wooden planks, her breathing heavy but steady. She was utterly exhausted, her strength drained from fighting the brutal cold. Ethan realized something then. She wasn't staying because she wanted to. She was staying because she had no other choice. The storm outside continued to rage, the wind howling like a wounded animal. If she had stayed out there any longer, she and her cubs wouldn't have survived the night. The thought hit him harder than he expected. Ethan stepped back toward the kitchen, keeping his movements slow, careful. He wasn't sure what the hell he was supposed to do next. This was a wild animal in his home. Was he supposed to just let her stay? His hands trembled as he reached for the cabinet, pulling out a can of beans. He wasn't sure why he did it. Maybe instinct, maybe guilt, maybe something else. But he poured some into a metal bowl and set it carefully on the floor a few feet away from the bears. The mother didn't move, but the cubs did. The smaller one lifted its tiny head, sniffing the air. It took an unsteady step forward, then another. Its black nose twitched as it reached the bowl, nudging it slightly before hesitantly licking at the food. Ethan's chest tightened. They were starving. The second cub joined, both of them devouring the meal as if they hadn't eaten in days. The mother bear finally lifted her head. Ethan froze, his heart hammering. She sniffed the air, her dark eyes flicked toward him, and then, without a sound, she lowered her head again. Not to eat, just to rest. Ethan stared at her, his mind struggling to comprehend what was happening. This was not how nature worked. Bears didn't just walk into a man's cabin and fall asleep at his feet. But tonight, nothing was as it should be. Tonight, the wild and the human world had collided. And for reasons Ethan couldn't yet understand, he had just made a choice that would change everything. The storm raged on outside, the wind screaming through the trees. Inside, a man and a wild grizzly shared the same roof. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Parker wasn't sure if he had saved them or if they had saved him. The fire burned low in the hearth, casting flickering shadows along the walls of the small cabin. The storm outside had not lessened, the wind still howling through the trees, rattling against the wooden structure like a beast trying to claw its way inside. But inside, in this impossible, surreal moment, there was a different kind of silence. One not of emptiness, but a fragile, unspoken understanding. Ethan sat on the edge of a wooden chair, unmoving, his body rigid with tension. His eyes remained locked on the massive grizzly bear lying across the cabin floor. She hadn't moved much since she collapsed, her breathing deep, heavy, exhausted, but her ears twitched, her eyes occasionally opening just enough to scan the room, watching him the way he was watching her. The two cubs, curled together in the blanket he had thrown onto the floor, had finally stopped shivering. Their tiny bodies rose and fell with slow, steady breaths, their faces pressed against the soft fabric. The warmth of the cabin had started working its way into their frozen bones, but they were still weak, still recovering from the brutality of the storm that had nearly claimed them. Ethan exhaled slowly, forcing himself to relax. This was insane, a grizzly and her cubs in his home. This shouldn't be happening, and yet it was. He reached for his mug of coffee, now cold, but his fingers trembled too much to hold it steady. He placed it back down. He had lived in the Alaskan wilderness for years, had faced off against storms, starvation, and even the occasional wolf encounter. But this was different. The bear lifted her head slightly, her massive dark eyes settling on him once more. Not aggressive, not fearful, just watching. She should have torn him apart by now, and yet she hadn't, because this wasn't a fight. It was something else. Ethan hesitated, then stood slowly, his boots barely making a sound on the wooden floor. The bear's ears twitched following his movement. He wasn't sure why he did what he did next. Maybe curiosity, maybe instinct, maybe something deeper. But he took a careful step toward the mother bear. She didn't move. Another step. Her eyes narrowed slightly, a deep rumbling breath escaping her nostrils. But she didn't growl. She didn't bare her teeth. Ethan stopped a few feet away. He could feel the heat radiating from her, could see the frost melting from her fur, tiny droplets dripping onto the floor. She smelled like the wild, like damp earth, pine, and something deeper, something primal. He crouched down, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're not supposed to be here," he murmured. The bear blinked. A ridiculous thought crossed his mind that she understood him. Of course, that was impossible. She was a wild animal, led by instinct, by survival, not reason. And yet the way she looked at him, the way she had chosen to come here into his home, to trust him instead of attack him, it felt like something more. The fire popped in the hearth, and Ethan saw the smallest flicker of reaction in the bear's eyes, like an echo of past memories. Had she been around humans before? Had she learned to not fear them? Or was she simply too tired to care? The smaller of the two cubs stirred in its sleep, letting out a soft whimper. The mother bear immediately turned her head, ears pricking up. The change in her was immediate, her exhaustion forgotten, her focus entirely on her child. She let out a deep vibrating hum, a low, comforting sound that Ethan had never heard before. The cub responded, shifting closer to its sibling, its tiny paw twitching. The bear relaxed again, her body settling once more onto the cabin floor. Ethan let out a slow breath. Something had just passed between them, something he couldn't explain. He stood up, stepping back toward his chair, but his mind was still racing. The bear had come here not as a predator, but as a mother. She had begged him for help, and in a moment of complete insanity, he had helped her. Now the question was, what happened next? The wind howled louder outside, rattling the walls of the cabin, but inside the flames burned steadily. Ethan took one last look at the bear and her cubs, then leaned back in his chair. Tomorrow they would have to figure this out, but for tonight, in this impossible, unthinkable moment, a man and a grizzly bear had found something neither of them expected: a truce. The first rays of dawn seeped through the frosted window, casting a pale bluish glow across the cabin's wooden interior. The fire had burned low, its embers still glowing faintly, keeping just enough warmth in the air to push back the bitter cold outside. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind an eerie silence, the kind that always follows nature's fury. Ethan stirred in his chair, his back aching from the awkward position he had fallen asleep in. His mind was slow to register his surroundings, still caught between the remnants of dreams and the heavy reality of the past night. But then he remembered the bear. His body tensed as his eyes snapped open, scanning the room. And there she was. The massive grizzly remained exactly where she had collapsed the night before, her colossal frame stretched across the wooden floor, her fur still damp from melted frost. Her breathing was deep, steady, not the labored gasps of a dying creature, but the calm of something at rest. The cubs were still curled in the blanket, their tiny forms rising and falling with slow, peaceful breaths. They looked so small, so fragile compared to their mother. For the first time, Ethan realized how close they had come to death. He exhaled, running a hand down his face. This was real. He had led a wild grizzly bear and her cubs into his home, and now he had no idea what the hell to do next. Slowly he stood, careful not to make sudden movements. His legs were stiff, his muscles sore from staying tense for so long. The floor creaked slightly beneath his weight, and that was enough. The mother bear's eyes snapped open. Ethan froze, her deep, dark gaze locked onto him, piercing through the dim light of the cabin. There was no aggression, no immediate sign of hostility, but there was awareness. She was watching, assessing, waiting. Ethan's breath remained shallow as he raised his hand slightly, a silent gesture of peace. "I'm just moving," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. The bear blinked, her ears flicking forward, but she didn't move. Slowly, carefully, Ethan stepped toward the kitchen. His mind raced through possible scenarios. How long could this continue? How long before her instincts overrode whatever fragile trust had been built in the night? Would she turn violent once she regained her strength? Would she leave? Did he want her to? He pushed the thought away as he reached for a can of food. His supplies weren't endless, but if this continued, he needed to figure out how to keep both himself and these bears from starving. The cubs wouldn't survive on their own, and the mother, weak, exhausted, wasn't in any shape to hunt yet. He poured some of the canned stew into a metal bowl and placed it a few feet from the bear. Then, hesitating for only a second, he pulled open another can, this time pouring its contents onto a second plate closer to the cubs. The scent of food filled the cabin. The mother bear sniffed the air. Ethan stepped back, giving them space. The tension in the room thickened as she lifted her massive head, her nostrils flaring. Her body remained still, but her eyes flicked between him and the offering on the floor. Then she moved slowly, deliberately. She lifted herself onto her paws. Ethan didn't breathe. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to back away, to run, to grab his rifle. But he didn't. She stepped forward, her massive claws clicking softly against the wooden floor, her head lowered toward the bowl, her nose hovering just above the food. And then, to Ethan's disbelief, she ate, not in a frenzied, starving way. She ate slowly, methodically, as if she had already decided there was no need for haste. The cubs, still groggy from sleep, stirred at the scent. The smaller one let out a tiny sound, something between a whimper and a purr, before toddling toward the second plate. Ethan watched, his heart pounding. This was it. This was acceptance. The bear was allowing this. The mother bear finished eating, licking her jaws before lifting her massive head once more. Her eyes met Ethan's. There was something different in them now. Something that hadn't been there before. Not fear, not aggression, something closer to understanding. Ethan swallowed hard. He had just fed a grizzly bear, and somehow, impossibly, she had let him. The cubs curled back into the blanket, full and warm, their tiny bodies pressing together. The mother bear settled back down beside them, her breathing deep, her body no longer trembling from exhaustion. Ethan exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the night settle onto him. For the first time since this had begun, he realized something. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were coexisting, and that terrified him more than anything else. The morning light streamed through the cabin windows, the storm now a memory. But Ethan knew deep in his bones the hardest part was still to come. The day stretched on in an eerie, surreal quiet. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crisp, frozen world outside the cabin walls. But inside, within the small wooden structure that had once been Ethan's solitary refuge, everything had changed. The grizzly bear and her cubs had taken up space in a place where no wild creature should ever be, and yet there they were. A full-grown bear stretched out on the floor and two tiny cubs curled in a makeshift nest of blankets near the fireplace. Ethan moved slowly, deliberately. Every action, every step was measured. He knew that one wrong move, one miscalculation, and this truce could shatter instantly. The mother bear watched him with those deep knowing eyes, tracking his every movement, not out of fear, but out of awareness. She was exhausted, but she was still a grizzly. Ethan kept his distance. He didn't push his luck. Instead, he focused on the one thing that had always been in his control: routine. He spent the morning checking his supplies, inventorying what food he had left. He'd been prepared to last the winter alone. But now he had unexpected mouths to feed. The canned goods would stretch for a while, but he knew the mother bear needed more than the scraps he could offer. Her body was still weak. She needed real food, and that meant only one thing. He had to go outside. The thought sent a ripple of unease through his gut. The cabin had become a fragile sanctuary, a place where neither human nor bear had attacked the other. But once he stepped outside, once he left that threshold, would she still let him back in? He swallowed the doubt and reached for his jacket. There was no choice. He had traps set further out along the ridge where he usually caught small game. If they were still intact, he might have something to bring back. As he pulled his boots on, he cast a glance toward the bear. Her eyes were already on him. He hesitated. "I need to go," he said, knowing full well she wouldn't understand. "Food." She didn't move. didn't react. The cubs stirred slightly in their sleep, their tiny paws twitching, but they remained curled together, completely unaware of the unspoken conversation between their mother and the man who had taken them in. Ethan grabbed his rifle, not for her, never for her, but for what else might be out there. He moved toward the door, his boots heavy against the wooden floor, and that's when she moved. Not fast, not aggressive, but deliberate. She lifted her head slightly, nostrils flaring, her ears flicked forward. Ethan stopped. His fingers hovered over the door handle. He could feel it. The tension, the shift in the air. This was the moment. Was he a guest or was he a prisoner? The Grizzly let out a deep exhale, a slow rumbling sound that sent vibrations through the air. She didn't bare her teeth, didn't rise to her feet, but she watched. And then she did nothing. She let him go. Ethan exhaled, realizing he had been holding his breath. He opened the door and stepped outside into the biting cold, the wind slicing against his face as the world swallowed him once more. The forest felt different. He had walked these woods for years, had hunted along these trails, had lived in this brutal, untamed land longer than he had lived anywhere else. But now he wasn't alone, and the thought of what waited for him back at the cabin filled his chest with something unfamiliar. Not fear, something deeper. He moved carefully through the frozen landscape, his breath visible in thick clouds, as he hiked toward the ridge where his traps were set. He found 2 catches, a snowshoe hare and a grouse, both half frozen, but still good enough to eat. It wasn't much, but it was something. He slung them over his shoulder and made his way back, his heart pounding harder than it should have. As the cabin came into view, the door was still closed. She was still inside. Would she still let him back? 2 in? He reached the steps, boots crunching against the packed snow. He hesitated, fingers hovering over the handle, pulse pounding in his ears. Then slowly he pushed the door open. The warmth hit him first, the scent of the firewood, the faint musk of bare fur lingering in the air. And there she was. The Grizzly lifted her head for a long, silent moment. They stared at each other. Then, to Ethan's complete shock, she lowered her head again and closed her eyes. He stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. She had let him leave, and more importantly, she had let him come back. Ethan didn't know what this meant. Not really. He didn't know how long this would last, how long they could continue this impossible truce, but for now, they had an understanding. He dropped the game near the stove, exhaling slowly, the weight of the world settling onto his shoulders. Tomorrow, he would figure out the next step. But tonight, a man and a bear shared a home once more. And somehow, impossibly, it felt right. The night pressed in against the cabin, thick and silent, the cold creeping against the windows in jagged frost pattern. The fire crackled low, casting a golden glow over the wooden walls, its warmth stretching only as far as the small room allowed. Ethan sat at the table, knife in hand, carefully skinning the hare he had brought back from the ridge. His movements were methodical, precise, a habit formed over years of survival in the wild. He wasn't thinking about the task. He was thinking about her, the Grizzly. She was still there, stretched out near the fireplace, her massive body curled protectively around her 2 cubs. They had barely stirred since their meal, their tiny bodies tucked into the blanket he had given them, breathing slow, steady. Ethan stole another glance at her. She wasn't asleep. She was watching him. Her dark eyes flickered in the firelight, locked onto his every movement. Not in fear, not in aggression, just studying. She had let him leave. She had let him return, but that didn't mean she trusted him. And, if he was being honest, he wasn't sure if he trusted her either. His fingers tightened around the knife. He knew how quickly this could change. One wrong move, one shift in the delicate balance they had built, and he would be just another body left for the cold to bury. And yet, he hadn't forced her out, because deep down, he knew the truth. If he had closed that door on her that night, she and her cubs would be dead. Something in him had changed when he saw them in that storm. And now, no matter how dangerous this was, he couldn't bring himself to break this strange, silent truce. The wind howled against the cabin walls, the sound distant yet ever present. Ethan sighed, setting the knife down, running a hand over his tired face. And that's when he heard it. A sound, faint, muffled, but unmistakable movement. Outside, his body went rigid. His ears strained against the silence, picking up the barely there crunch of snow. Slow, deliberate steps. This wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. Someone was out there. The mother bear lifted her head, ears flicking toward the sound. She heard it too. Ethan moved instinctively, pushing himself to his feet, grabbing his rifle from where it rested against the doorframe. His pulse thundered in his ears as he slowly stepped toward the window, keeping to the shadows. He peered out. At first he saw nothing, just the trees, their dark forms swaying in the wind, the snow falling in gentle flurries. Then a shadow moved between the trees. Human. Ethan's breath hitched. No one came out this far. No one. Unless they were lost or looking for something. The mother bear let out a low, rumbling growl, deep and guttural. Not loud, but a clear warning. The cubs stirred at the sound, shifting in their sleep. Ethan's grip tightened on his rifle. Whoever was out there, they had no idea what they were walking into. Another step, closer this time, and then a sharp knock at the door. Ethan's heart stopped. The bear rose to her feet. Her massive form blocked the firelight, casting a shadow across the cabin. Her ears were pinned back, her body tense. The knock came again, louder, more insistent. Ethan stepped forward, his breath slow and controlled, the rifle steady in his hands. He hesitated for only a second before gripping the handle and yanking the door open, and standing there in the freezing night was a man. His face was obscured by a thick hood lined with frost, his heavy coat dusted with snow. His breath came in sharp bursts, his body hunched against the cold. But his eyes were locked on what was behind Ethan, the bear. The stranger's body stiffened, his hand twitched toward his waist, and in that split second, Ethan knew he was armed. And in the stranger's eyes, standing in the glow of the fire, was not a mother trying to survive. It was a threat. Ethan had a choice he never thought he would have to make, and whatever he decided next would change everything. The world outside was silent, frozen in time, the snow falling softly in the dim firelight. But inside the cabin, everything was on the verge of collapse. Ethan stood in the doorway, rifle gripped tight, his body a wall between two worlds, between the human at his doorstep and the grizzly behind him. The stranger didn't move, neither did Ethan, but the bear did. A deep rumbling growl rose from her chest, low and warning, the kind of sound that made even the most seasoned hunters freeze in place. She wasn't attacking, not yet. But she didn't need to. She was a mother protecting her young, and in her mind, this man at the door was a threat. Ethan could see it happening. One wrong move, one flicker of aggression from the stranger and the balance they had built, the fragile, unthinkable truce that had kept them alive would be shattered. He had seconds to decide. "Don't," Ethan said, his voice hard, his grip tightening on his rifle. The warning was clear. The stranger's hand hovered over something at his waist, probably a knife. Maybe even a gun. His breath curled in the freezing air, his shoulders rising and falling with tension, and then finally he spoke. "You know what's behind you, right?" His voice was cracked from the cold. Ethan's jaw clenched. "I know exactly what's behind me," the stranger scoffed, shaking his head. "You should be dead." Ethan didn't answer because, truthfully, he should be. The stranger's eyes flickered toward the bear again, studying her, analyzing her movements. He wasn't just a lost traveler, he was a hunter. "I tracked her," the man muttered almost to himself. "Saw her down by the river a few days ago, but then the storm hit and I lost her trail." Ethan's stomach turned. He knew what this was. This wasn't coincidence. This man had come looking for her. Ethan stepped forward, blocking his view. "She's not yours to hunt," the stranger scoffed, his breath curling in the cold. "She's a wild animal. And that pelt?" He shook his head, rubbing his gloved hands together. "That pelt could buy me a whole damn year off the grid." Ethan's hands trembled, but not from the cold. This man wasn't leaving without a fight, and behind him, the grizzly knew it too. The growl grew deeper, vibrating through the wooden floor, rattling the very air in the small cabin. The cubs stirred, whimpering softly. The mother shifted her weight, muscles coiling. She was tired. She was weak, but she would fight if she had to. Ethan had made a choice when he let her in. Now he had to make another one. He could step aside, let nature take its course, let the hunter do what he had come here to do. Or he could do the unthinkable. He could stand between them. Ethan exhaled sharply, gripping his rifle tighter. Then, without hesitation, he raised it. Not at the bear, at the hunter. The stranger stilled. His eyes flicked between the barrel of the gun and Ethan's face, searching for doubt, for weakness. He found none. "Walk away," Ethan said. His voice was calm, steady, deadly. The stranger's lips pressed into a tight line. His fingers twitched. For a moment, Ethan thought he would go for his weapon, but then finally he took a step back. "You're making a mistake," the hunter muttered. "That thing will turn on you the second it's strong enough." Ethan didn't blink. "Maybe, but that's not your problem." Another second of silence. Then the hunter exhaled sharply, turning on his heel. His boots crunched against the frozen ground as he walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the trees. Ethan didn't lower the gun until he was gone, until the only sound left was the wind. Inside the cabin, the bear watched. She had seen everything. She had understood. Ethan let out a slow breath, stepping back inside. The warmth of the fire hit him like a wave, but the cold inside his chest did not fade. He turned back to the grizzly. She wasn't growling anymore. She just looked at him, and for the first time, Ethan realized she wasn't afraid. For the first time, she trusted him, and maybe, just maybe, he trusted her, too. The storm was gone. The night had passed, and in the fragile space of a wooden cabin deep in the Alaskan wilderness, a man and a bear had changed the course of their fates forever. This was more than a story about survival. It was about trust, about making a choice when no one else would, about standing between two worlds and choosing to protect instead of destroy. Ethan Parker was a man who had come to the wild to escape humanity. But in the end, it was the wild that showed him what it meant to be human. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. We bring you more incredible true stories from the untamed world. And most importantly, share this with someone who believes in the power of nature, because sometimes the most unlikely connections are the ones that change.